Okay, out of all the Christmas movies out there, which ones tend to be the most popular? Well, outside of the Home Alone movies, probably adaptations of A Christmas Carol. Now, what about Bill Murray movies? You got your Ghostbusters and Groundhog Days and Garfield's. But there's one I never hear people mention, let alone talk about when discussing and making videos about Christmas classics. I'm talking about 1988's Scrooged, directed by Richard Donner and a score composed by Danny Elfman of all people? What the fuck? A shockingly good and emotional contemporary adaptation of Dickens's classic, with Bill Murray at the forefront of it in the lead of Frank Cross, this movie's version of Ebenezer Scrooge. It did fairly well at the box office. It had made $18.6 million in its first week, and $100.3 million overall. And it does play yearly amongst other Christmas movies. As for reviews, wait, what? A 3.3 on Letterboxd? Roger Ebert didn't like it.
My favorite YouTuber, Shape Rose Productions, didn't like it!
But as a contemporary adaptation, as a Bill Murray movie, how? Did we not watch the same movie? Well, even if that is the general reception of the movie, I still want to discuss why I think the movie works so well. Of course, feel free to disagree, but I do wholeheartedly believe this movie is a massively underappreciated and often overlooked classic. So let's start with the most basic thing, how it works as an adaptation. So there's been a lot of Christmas Carol adaptations, and I mean a lot. Everything from direct one-to-one adaptations of the story to adaptations involving famous characters, i.e. Mickey Mouse, Muppets, My Little Pony, the Smurfs? All dogs go to heaven? Okay. And even if most of them are good, they don't always add a ton. Everyone knows the story by heart and all the famous lines ad nauseum. And while you can still enjoy it and have fun with it, it can become stale very quickly. It's like Christmas music in that regard. Even if you don't mind it and can still enjoy it, at the very least in December, you're gonna get sick of it before you even realize it. Which is why the stuff that's less traditional and more different sounding is what'll stick. Mickey's Christmas Carol and Jingle Bells? Boring. Batman Returns and Snowball Park from Mario 3D World? Now that's what I call spicing up your Christmas. Pour that into your cider. But that's where a movie like Scrooge stands out to me. It spices up the original story by giving it a contemporary twist that still feels like it works to this day, even in its commentary.
Where are we, Trump Tower?
$200 I don't have to tell me you don't speak. We're gonna get a real treat. When they're free.
Frank, you still spend the next 15 years of your life sitting on your ass watching television.
Of course a contemporary Scrooge will be a patriarchal president of a large company. Of course that Scrooge will be a bigger asshole. Meaning that it would make sense for that Scrooge to take longer to learn his lesson. Sure, there have always been jerks throughout history, but there seems to be a level unrivaled by that of the 20th and 21st centuries. You read or watch the original Scrooge and you'll know that he'll end up changing. But you also know that time period was so long ago that it practically seems fictitious to you, even if you look past the ghost stuff. But seeing it in a more modern, I say, despite it being from over 30 years ago, setting allows the viewers to see how a modern version of the story could take place, and how it could affect someone. Because let's face it, you're more likely to know someone like Frank Cross than you are an Ebenezer Scrooge. And to me, that's what makes his growth and eventual turnaround much more compelling. Now, of course, I'm not going to act like this movie is perfect, especially after knowing how much of it got cut down or just cut out altogether. So maybe people would think more highly of the movie if we got a longer cut, allowing us to see a longer process of change in Frank. But with that being said, I still think the movie works well within what it gives us. It updates our Scrooge as instead of someone who grew up to become an accountant from stiff environments and being poisoned by greed, he grew up as a lazy nobody who sat around and watched TV all day, with parents who were neglectful and abusive, and later becomes poisoned by selfishness. Scrooge is always a selfish character, but this one takes out the greed aspect. While yes, Frank does value profits from the show he puts on, he seems to overall value being approved by his higher-ups and simply gaining more power. Almost as if he's trying to chase the validation he never got as a child. By giving these aspects to him, it allows his character to be more nuanced than just a greedy old miser. Even the ghosts themselves get a contemporary update that works better as reflections of part of Frank. They all seem representative of aspects of TV culture and movies. The Ghost of Christmas Past could seem reminiscent of a character that would be on a show like Taxi. The Ghost of Christmas Present looks similar to Glinda from The Wizard of Oz. And the Ghost of Christmas Future has a TV monitor for a face that glitches and distorts as if broken and run down by the passage of time. It reminds me of how in the Zemeckis Christmas Carol all the ghosts were played by the actor of Scrooge himself, Jim Carrey, which was a unique way of showcasing how the ghosts are connected to Scrooge outside of just showing and knowing his past. But I would argue that the most interesting update and change is to that of the Bob Cratchit character. This movie does something interesting at first by giving us this character, Elliot Loudermilk. The fuck kind of... An employee of Frank's company. Everything we see at first would normally indicate to the audience that he's going to be Cratchit, but within literal minutes of the movie starting, he gets fired, and his character gets sidelined to just funny side bits between the main story and coming back at the end during the climax.
Honey, I'm home!
Almost immediately after seeing him be fired, we see how the Cratchit of the story is in fact Grace, Frank's personal assistant. Since it is, after all, a modern take, it would arguably make more sense that the Cratchit character is a lower-income black woman due to it both being more relevant and more compelling opposed to if it was just another white guy. Speaking of the Cratchits,
Tiny Tim is actually good in this version!
Calvin in this is one of, if not the best depictions of Tiny Tim I've ever seen in any Christmas Carol adaptations. In most adaptations of the story, Tiny Tim is just depicted as a cutesy ill child who we are meant to love immediately because cutesy child, and then weep when we hear that he's passed. And most, if not all, these versions suck. Unless it's Tiny Tim from Mickey's Christmas Carol, but that's solely due to the fact that he looks and sounds like the most precious thing in the goddamn universe.
Oh my! Look at all the wonderful things to eat!
You're my baby!
However, in the original story, he's more than that. He's a child who's wise beyond his years from being aware of his ever-growing mortality. He's thoughtful and a bit more reserved than the rest of his family. He's arguably an outcast, but is still loved all the same. Calvin is exactly that. And they take it a step further. Rather than making him a child with cancer or any other terminal illness, they just make him mute, traumatized after seeing his father killed. And while ill children aren't non-existent nowadays, it's not to the degree that it might have been back in ye olden days. Illnesses that children like Tiny Tim had back then are things that are easily avoidable today. They also probably thought that him being a cancer patient probably would have been a bit too depressing, which, yeah, though I have no proof of that being the case. By making him mute, he still is ill in a technical sense, but it's still something he could more easily recover from. They also show how he's wiser for a kid his age, like Book Tim, by having him be the only one to figure out the puzzle his older siblings couldn't. It's a simple moment, but still enough to be able to make that parallel. Interestingly enough, when they show what happens to Calvin in the future, where I guess he just gets sent to a mental institute? What the fuck? Where I guess he just gets sent to a mental institute? Everything in that segment is a blinding white light in a very liminal looking environment, which is a stark contrast to the original, where the future is depicted as dark, shadowy, and bleak. It feels more befitting though. The future is dark technically, but admittedly not as dark as, what it could have been in the original. But also, since most modern depictions of the future make everything blindingly monochromatic or just Croom? Cause,
everything is chrome in the future.
Though it does inevitably jump to the dark atmosphere that you'd expect when we see Frank's dead. Which, can I just say, this scene is way more dark than the other versions I have seen, at least in terms of the context. Mickey's Christmas Carol version of this still makes me shit myself, but in Scrooge, he isn't just hanging above his casket in the ground trying not to fall into the hell that awaits him. In this, he literally ends up in the casket as it enters the fire, igniting him, and he literally begins to burn before he is inevitably sent back. Like, holy shit, if the Mickey version did that, I find that one even more traumatizing than the Zemeckis one. Well hey, that seems to cover everything I have to say for comparisons. Did I miss anything?
Lumpy.
Nope. So why don't we talk about what most people probably care about from this movie? The funny! Holy shit, this movie is funny, you guys. Y'all are seriously sleeping on the comedy that's in this movie. There's just something about 80s comedies that just hit different compared to modern ones. The closest thing I'd argue is Edgar Wright movies, namely the Cornetto trilogy, because they have so many small blink and you'll miss it jokes, hilarious line delivery, and deadpan moments, and even subtle jokes in the environment. Movies like Blues Brothers, Ghostbusters, Hook, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Scrooged are all like that to me. The comedy also feels very slapsticky and old-fashioned in some ways, which I feel like kind of ties into the whole TV theming throughout the entire thing, like very classic TV type humor. But this movie has plenty of moments like,
Father loves beaver.
I must have been out of my mind!
Let's face it, Frank. Garden slugs got more out of life than you did.
Name one.
All day long, listen to people give excuses why they can't work. My back hurts, my legs ache. I'm only 4.
I'm sorry. I thought you were Richard Pryor?
Also, how long did it take any of you before you realized that Claire in this scene wasn't holding a razor? It was a joint. But point being, this movie is very funny, and there's one person primarily responsible for that. This is easily the best performance Bill Murray has ever given. Not just in terms of the comedy, but the heart and emotion as well. Even if you're a Bill Murray fan, you know his type of humor can get a bit old after a while. And while I love Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day, you could very easily argue that it's the same exact character with the same exact sense of humor. Now, I'm not going to act like that isn't a good part of his personality and humor in Scrooged, but it significantly stands out to me in comparison to those other two movies. Bill Murray very clearly seems to be putting far more energy and emotion into his deliveries, to where it can almost seem shockingly out of place considering the usual Bill Murray shtick we're all used to. You watch Groundhog Day and you never see any huge moment of emotion or reaction from him despite his situation. He never starts yelling and screaming like he's having a manic episode, he just stares wide-eyed and confused, which, yes, does work fine in that movie. The humor works fine from him being more reserved and restrained from his reactions, but you watch Scrooge and you get reactions like this.
You're not a worm-faced, you're an hallucination brought on by alcohol, Russian vodka, poisoned by Chernobyl.
How's everything going, Frank?
Couldn't be better, Preston.
You gotta believe me, Elliot! I'm having a much worse day than you are!
And maybe this is just me, but that's just significantly funnier, due to the fact that we just never see reactions like these from Bill Murray. It's so unexpected from someone like him that you can't help but burst out laughing. Another comparison, look at the scene from Ghostbusters. Bankman is about to get attacked by Slimer, and how does Bill Murray react to it? Kinda weak. Little energy. Seems more like a table read delivery. But how does Bill Murray's scream reactions compare to in Scrooged? Yeah, this is just funnier. Bill Murray is just way funnier to me when he's giving bigger reactions, which I guess would only be so funny since it's not his usual type of delivery. But I think that helps his role stand out as one of his best because of these big reactions. Obviously humor is subjective and all that nonsense, but it does genuinely help the performance stand out. How could you not laugh at a scene like this? There is no way that was supposed to happen. Ain't no way Bill Murray intentionally chose to do a pratfall. This scene always makes my dad and I laugh the hardest. But there's something else from his performance that makes this movie for me. We'll get to that scene eventually, but I finally want to bring up Claire. This is yet another unique thing that the movie does as a Christmas Carol adaptation. It brings back Scrooge's love, which if we're going back to adaptation comparisons, this is another thing that I feel like works better. In the story and most adaptations, when Scrooge sees his memories of his love, Belle, it's the first moment where we see a large part of his humanity. He truly mourns the loss of her and that he will never get her back or ever see her again. He doesn't know where she is or even if she's still alive. You could argue that she was the humanity grounding him in a cold world, but the cold world was just too overpowering. Claire returning instead of just being reserved in memories works because not only does it allow us to see further where Frank's humanity lies, much like Scrooge, but that in the modern age, it's far easier to get back into contact with someone you knew from years ago. Unlike in the 19th century, obviously. They also don't just make Claire a prize to be won for Frank changing. We see not only is she more of a rounded character than Belle in the original, but she also chooses to stick around. She wants to see Frank change, and she still cares about him even after all these years. Also, maybe this is a hot take, but I think this is the best chemistry I've seen in a Bill Murray movie. Peter and Dana are charming, sure, it's fine, and I can't even remember the woman's name in Groundhog Day. Shelley Snipes, I don't know. But this relationship I always found myself more invested in. They genuinely come across as an old couple that, despite ending their relationship years ago, never held disdain for the other and still care about the other deep down. Or maybe I just simply find Claire's actress more endearing than the other two. Who knows? All I know is that these two are charming as heck. But let's finally get to it. The scene we've all been waiting for. Bill Murray's emotional monologue at the end of the movie. Good God, no scene in a Christmas movie has ever moved me as much as this one has. Every other scene of Bill Murray actually seemingly trying, either being loud or emotional or both, all feel like they were leading up to this moment. To me, even if you don't believe Frank's redemption arc, this should really seal the deal. Both from the words themselves to it looking like Bill Murray is legitimately breaking down. It's just so raw and real. It truly does feel like a man finally embracing the change in his worldview, and that the change is beautiful and he regrets not seeing it, embracing it before now. I refuse to believe that at least some of this wasn't improvised at least a little. Oh hey. Holy shit, what the fuck? Like, do you see what I mean with this? I have seen this movie dozens of times. I watch it every December, sometimes more than once just because I've been meaning to do this video for years now. Oops. But every time I watch that scene, Niagara Falls, it always moves me. As someone who tends to pride himself on being an optimist, this scene hits hard. Because I have my moments of wishing to be a Scrooge. But watching this movie and in turn this scene always do give me that small glimmer of a reminder that life is more beautiful and more meaningful when we choose to be kind to others. Sure, it can be hard sometimes and it's always easier to be mean, but that's what can make the holidays so important and special. It's that time to reflect on why you're choosing to be more kind and generous now than the rest of the year. And even allow people to wish to choose to keep that mindset year round.
You won't be one of these bastards who says Christmas is once a year and it's a fraud. It's not. It can happen every day. You just gotta want that feeling. And if you like it and you want it, you'll get greedy for it. You'll want it every day of your life, and it can happen to you.
Ultimately, if people don't like this movie, that's okay. It's perfectly fine for people to not be able to get into this movie for one reason or another. But the main takeaway I want to be is this: that simply looking at a movie, even one like this, always has a little bit of something that you can take away from not by looking at it upon just a surface level. I love movies. I love analyzing movies. Even if they're movies that aren't great or well received, or even if they're just straight up bad objectively. I don't object to people's opinions on movies because they're wrong or because I disagree. I just want people to be able to see movies from a different point of view, to look at certain things they might not have noticed or realized, and maybe it helps them to view the movie differently, even if slightly. All I ever want to do is spread the fun of overanalyzing movies by reading between the lines. Does it ultimately matter in any way, shape, or form? Nope. But I still enjoy expressing my passion for movies I love. And after years of watching different channels do the same, I'm glad I finally got to throw my hat in the ring. Have a happy holidays, for whatever it is you celebrate. And thank you for watching. Now to finally continue and finish that insane Peter Pan movies video I've had in the works for nearly 3 years, or finally an analysis on the greatest movie of all time, Time Cop 2.